3 Disturbing True Library Horror Stories, Story 1. The reading room. I used to work as a security guard at a university library. It was a part-time gig during my final year of college, and honestly, it paid better than most campus jobs. The shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which meant I had the entire building to myself after the last few stragglers left around midnight. The library was old. Built in 1923, it had that classic architecture: high ceilings, wooden shelves that stretched up 2 stories, and a main reading room with these massive arched windows. During the day, it was beautiful. At night, it was something else entirely. My job was simple: walk the floors every hour, make sure no one was hiding to stay past closing, check that all the doors were locked, and sit at the security desk the rest of the time. Easy money, or so I thought. Everything was normal for the first few weeks. I'd do my rounds, listen to podcasts, study for exams. The silence didn't bother me. I actually liked it. But then, about a month into the job, things started to feel off. It began with the elevator. The library had an old elevator that made this distinct ding sound whenever it reached a floor. One night around 2 a.m. I heard it. Ding. 3rd floor. I looked at the camera monitor. The elevator doors opened, but no one got out. The doors closed, and it went back down. Ding. 2nd floor. Same thing. Doors opened to an empty hallway, then closed. I figured it was just a mechanical issue. Old building, old elevator. But then I heard footsteps. They were coming from directly above me, the 3rd floor. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the reading room. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, even though there was no one to call at that hour, and headed upstairs. The 3rd floor was the oldest part of the library. It had the original reading room, which was rarely used anymore because the university had built a newer study area on the 1st floor. When I pushed open the heavy wooden door, the hinges creaked, echoing through the empty space. I shined my flashlight across the room. Rows of old wooden tables, high-backed chairs, and shelves filled with dusty reference books that probably hadn't been touched in years. Everything looked normal, empty, silent. But then I noticed something. One of the chairs at the far end of the room was pulled out from the table. Just one. And on the table in front of it was an open book. My stomach tightened. I had done my rounds at 1 a.m. That chair had been pushed in. I was sure of it. I walked, over slowly, my footsteps echoing on the old wooden floor. The book was a dictionary, old and worn, open to a page in the middle. I looked down at it, and my blood ran cold. Someone had circled a single word in pencil: behind. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing. Just empty aisles and shadows. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I backed away from the table, not taking my eyes off the empty room, and got the hell out of there. When I got back to the security desk, I checked the cameras. I rewound the footage from the 3rd floor. For 2 hours, nothing moved. No one entered or left. But at exactly 1:47 a.m., the camera glitched. Just for a second. Static, then back to normal. And when the image returned, that chair was pulled out, and the book was open. I wanted to quit right then, but I needed the money, so I stayed. But I made a rule: no more going to the 3rd floor alone at night. For about a week, nothing happened. I started to convince myself that it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe another security guard had been messing with me. But then one night I heard it again. The footsteps, directly above me. This time I didn't go upstairs. I sat at my desk staring at the camera feed. The 3rd floor reading room was empty, but I could hear the footsteps, clear as day, moving across the floor above my head. Back and forth, back and forth. Then they stopped, right above me. And I heard a new sound, a chair scraping across the floor. On the camera, nothing moved, but I could hear it. The sound of wood scraping against wood, slow and deliberate, like someone was dragging a chair across the room. I grabbed my radio and called campus police. I told them I thought someone had broken in. 2 officers showed up 20 minutes later. We went upstairs together, and I felt safer with them there. The reading room was exactly as I'd left it. Empty. Quiet. No chairs out of place, no open books. The officers checked every corner, every aisle, even the old storage closet in the back. Nothing. One of them laughed and said old buildings make weird noises. Settling foundations, temperature changes, stuff like that. I wanted to believe him, but I knew what I'd heard. After they left, I went back to the security desk. It was almost 4 a.m. and I just wanted the shift to end. I pulled up the camera feed again, just to check, and that's when I saw it. In the 3rd floor reading room on the camera, clear as anything. One of the chairs was slowly sliding away from the table, not being pushed, not being pulled, just sliding on its own, inch by inch, across the floor. I watched in frozen horror as it moved about 3 feet, then stopped. The camera feed was crystal clear. There was no glitch this time, no static. Just that chair, moving by itself in an empty room. I didn't go back to that job. I called in the next day and quit over the phone. I don't care what anyone says about old buildings and noises. I know what I saw. Something was in that reading room, and whatever it was, it wanted me to know it was there. Story 2, the closed section. This happened to my friend Sarah when she was doing research for her graduate thesis. She was studying historical documents at the city's main public library, one of those massive buildings that takes up an entire block downtown. It's a beautiful place during the day, with natural light pouring through skylights and people quietly working at tables. But Sarah needed access to the special collections section, and that was a different world entirely. Special collections was in the basement. You needed special permission to access it, and you had to be escorted by a librarian. The documents down there were old, some dating back to the 1800s, and they were kept in a climate-controlled environment away from the general public. Sarah had been going down there twice a week for about a month. The librarian who usually helped her was a woman named Ms. Chen, probably in her 60s, very quiet and professional. She would unlock the section, help Sarah find what she needed, and then sit at a desk nearby while Sarah worked, making sure she handled everything properly. The special collections room was long and narrow, with rows of metal shelving units filled with boxes and old leather-bound volumes. The lighting was dim to protect the documents, just a few overhead fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. There were no windows, of course, being in the basement, and the air always smelled like old paper and dust. One evening, Sarah had asked to stay later than usual. She was on a deadline and needed to finish cataloging some letters from a local historical society. Ms. Chen agreed, but said she could only stay until 8 p.m. as she had another commitment. She gave Sarah strict instructions. When she was done, she should turn off the lights, close the door behind her, and make sure it locked automatically. Sarah agreed. She'd been down there so many times that she felt comfortable being alone for an hour or so. Miss Chen left at exactly 8 p.m. Sarah heard the main door to special collections close and lock from the outside. She was alone. For about 30 minutes, everything was fine. Sarah was absorbed in her work, taking photos of documents with her phone and making notes. The only sounds were the hum of the lights and the occasional creak of the building settling. Then she heard paper rustling. It came from the back of the room, several aisles away from where she was working. Sarah looked up, listening. The rustling continued, like someone was flipping through pages of a book. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice sounded small in the long, narrow room. The rustling stopped. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She stood up from the desk and peered down the aisle. The lights were dimmer toward the back and she couldn't see clearly, but she was certain she was alone. Miss Chen had locked the door behind her. No one else could get in. She sat back down and tried to focus on her work, telling herself it was just the ventilation system moving papers around. But then she heard it again. This time it was closer, maybe just 2 aisles over, and then she heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, shuffling footsteps moving between the shelves. Sarah's hands were shaking. She grabbed her phone and pulled up Miss Chen's number, but there was no signal. Of course, she was in a basement with concrete walls. Is someone there? She called out again, trying to sound braver than she felt. No answer. But the footsteps continued. They were moving along the aisle parallel to hers, keeping pace with where she stood. Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to wait around to find out what was making that noise. She quickly gathered her things, shoving her notebook and phone into her bag. She needed to get to the door, but as she moved toward the exit, the footsteps changed direction. They were now moving to cut her off, coming down the aisle that led directly to the door. Sarah froze. She could see the door at the end of the room, maybe 40 feet away. The footsteps were getting louder, closer, and then in the dim light she saw a shadow. It was cast on the wall near the door, moving slowly into view. The shadow of a person, hunched over with arms that seemed too long. Sarah couldn't breathe. She backed up slowly, her eyes locked on that shadow. It moved into the aisle between her and the door, blocking her only exit. That's when she noticed something else. There was another aisle on the far side of the room, one that wrapped around behind the shelves. If she could make it there, she might be able to circle back to the door. She moved as quietly as she could, stepping carefully between the metal shelving units. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might give her away. The shadow was still there near the door, not moving. Sarah made it to the back aisle. It was darker back here, the lights barely reaching. She could barely see where she was going. She felt her way along the shelves, moving as quickly as she dared, and then she heard it. Breathing. Raspy, labored breathing coming from right behind her. She ran. She didn't care about the noise anymore. She sprinted down the aisle, turned the corner, and bolted for the door. She could hear the footsteps behind her now, fast and heavy. Matching her pace, she reached the door and grabbed the handle. Locked. Ms. Chen had locked it from the outside. Sarah pounded on the door, screaming for help. The footsteps were right behind her. She could feel a presence, something standing just inches away. And then suddenly the lights went out. She was in complete darkness, still pounding on the door, screaming. And in that darkness she felt something touch her shoulder. Cold fingers pressing into her skin. Then the lights came back on. Sarah spun around. The room was empty. Completely empty, no shadow, no figure, nothing. But on the floor, right where she'd been standing, was a single old photograph. She picked it up with shaking hands. It was a black and white photo from the early 1900s, showing the library's staff. In the back row, there was a man with a strange, hunched posture and arms that seemed too long for his body. Someone had drawn a circle around his face in red ink. On the back of the photo, in faded handwriting, were 3 words: "He never left." Sarah hammered on the door until a janitor heard her and let her out. She never went back to special collections. She told her professor she'd finish her research using digital archives. To this day, she still has that photograph, and sometimes late at night she swears she can hear those shuffling footsteps in her apartment, moving through rooms where no one should be. Story 3. The Last Patron. This story comes from a woman named Jennifer who worked at a small rural library, the kind of place with maybe 3 staff members total, serving a town of less than 2,000 people. It was a single-story building built in the 1970s, with that typical layout: circulation desk near the entrance, rows of shelves, a children's section in one corner, and a few study tables scattered around. Jennifer worked the closing shift, which meant she was there from 2 p.m. until 8 p.m. on weekdays. Most days were pretty quiet. They'd get maybe a dozen patrons throughout the afternoon, and by 7 p.m. the place was usually empty. The routine was simple. At 7:45, Jennifer would make an announcement over the PA system that the library would be closing in 15 minutes. She'd walk the aisles to make sure no one was lingering, turn off the computers in the public area, and start shutting things down. By 8 p.m. everyone would be gone and she'd lock up and go home. One Thursday evening in October, everything started out normal. They'd had a few patrons throughout the afternoon, but by 7 p.m. Jennifer thought she was alone. She did her closing announcement at 7:45, then started her walkthrough. That's when she saw him. He was sitting at one of the study tables near the back, partially hidden by a shelf. An older man, maybe in his 70s, wearing a brown jacket and glasses. He had a book open in front of him but wasn't reading. Just sitting there staring at the pages. "Excuse me, sir," Jennifer said, approaching the table. "We're closing in about 10 minutes. The man didn't respond. Didn't even look up. Jennifer moved closer. "Sir? The library is closing soon." Still nothing. She could see now that he was completely still, not breathing heavily, not moving at all. For a terrifying moment she thought he might be dead, that he'd had a heart attack or something while sitting there. But then he turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were strange, pale and glassy, like he was looking through her rather than at her. And when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Just a few more minutes, please." Something about him made Jennifer deeply uncomfortable, but she forced a smile. "Okay, just a few more minutes, but we really do need to close by 8. She walked back to the circulation desk, keeping an eye on him. He went back to staring at the book, motionless. Jennifer busied herself with closing tasks, but she kept glancing over at the man. He hadn't moved, hadn't turned a page, just sat there in that same position. At 7:55, she decided to check on him again. When she got to the table, her stomach dropped. The book he'd been reading was a library copy of local obituaries from the 1990s, and it was open to a specific page. Jennifer looked closer and saw that one obituary was marked with a faint pencil line. The obituary was for a man named Robert Henley, and the photo next to the obituary was of the man sitting in front of her. Jennifer's mouth went dry. She looked at the man, then back at the page. It was the same face, same brown jacket, same glasses. "Sir," she started, but her voice cracked. "Sir, who are you?" The man slowly turned his head toward her again. This time his expression was different. Sad, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I just wanted to read one more time. I used to come here every day." Jennifer took a step back. You need to leave. Right now." The man stood up slowly. He was tall, but there was something wrong with the way he moved, like his joints weren't working quite right. Stiff, mechanical. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said. His voice was hollow, distant. "I just miss this place. I spent so many hours here." Jennifer was backing away now, her heart racing. "Please leave. The library is closed." The man looked around the room, his eyes moving slowly across the shelves, the tables, the walls, like he was memorizing everything. "I died in this building," he said quietly, 28 years ago. "Heart attack, right there by the history section." He pointed to a spot near the back wall. "No one found me until the next morning." Jennifer felt like she couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. "Every year on the anniversary," he continued, "I come back, just to sit here, to remember what it felt like to be alive, surrounded by all these books." He started walking toward the door, his movements stiff and unnatural. As he passed Jennifer, she felt a wave of cold air, like he was sucking all the warmth out of the room. He stopped at the front door and turned back to her one last time. "Thank you for letting me stay," he said. "I'll see you next year." And then he walked through the door, not opened it, not pushed it open. He walked through the solid wood and glass and disappeared into the darkness outside. Jennifer stood frozen for several minutes, unable to move. When she finally got her legs working, she ran to the door. It was locked. had been locked since 7 p.m. when the last real patron had left. She grabbed the obituary book from the table where the man had been sitting. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She read the full obituary for Robert Henley. He had died on October 17, 1996 in the town library. Heart attack. They found him the next morning slumped over a book in the history section. According to the obituary, he had been a devoted library patron, visiting almost every single day for over 30 years. Jennifer looked at the calendar on the circulation desk. October 17th. Today. She grabbed her things and got out of that building as fast as she could. The next day, she told her supervisor she was quitting. She didn't give details, just said she couldn't work there anymore. But before she left, she did some research. She talked to some of the older staff members who'd worked there in the 90s. One of them, a woman who'd since retired, remembered Robert Henley. "Oh yes, I remember Robert," she'd said. "Lovely man. Very quiet. Came in every single day, rain or shine. We were all so sad when he passed. He loved this library more than anyone I've ever known." Then the woman added something that made Jennifer's blood run cold. "You know, it's the strangest thing. Every year on the anniversary of his death, October 17th, someone claims they see him in the library, always sitting at the same table, reading the same kind of books. Some of the staff think it's just a local legend, but I've always wondered." Jennifer never went back to that library. She moved to a different town a few months later. But every October 17th, she thinks about Robert Henley sitting at that table, surrounded by the books he loved so much, and she wonders if he's still there, waiting patiently for the library to close, just so he can feel alive again for a few brief moments.